Hey family, it's Araya Lynn, author of Who Told You That You Were Naked. Today I'll be discussing a very controversial but serious matter: why we rarely associate black people with biblical figures. It's common today for us to see images that identify biblical figures as people with European features, and rarely do most of us question those images. We accept them as is and as fact because to us, that is how they have always been portrayed, especially to those who belong to Christianity. Though these figures do not represent or account for any other nationality, race, color, or creed, for centuries we have hung them in all of our churches, homes, and other common areas. Most would argue that it does not matter what ethnicities the people of the Bible were, and the focus should only be on the message. My response to that is to the contrary. The Bible is primarily about bloodlines and the story of one bloodline in particular. If we have no idea who that bloodline is, this is what makes reading the Bible extremely difficult and causes complication interpreting the Bible's prophecies. So your question shouldn't be why does the race of biblical figures matter, but instead, why did the race of these figures matter so much that they were erased? Before we address the question of what happened to black people in the Bible, we'll first discuss why we're even asking it in the first place. Let's talk a bit about mitochondrial Eve. Wikipedia says that in human genetics, the mitochondrial Eve is the matrilineal most recent common ancestor of all living humans. What is the Eve gene and who carries it? The Eve gene is only found in African women and essentially has all the variations possible for the entire human mitochondrial genome. In this picture, we see a black Brazilian mother with her 5 children, 3 of which are albino, and the father of all 5 children is also black. Scientifically, the black woman is the only organism that possesses the mitochondrial DNA that has all variations possible for every different kind of human being on this earth: the African, the albino, the European, the Middle Eastern, etc. When the DNA of a black woman mutates, all other types of human beings come about. This is called the Eve gene and is only found in black women. Now we see that black people have the ability to create a variety of beings that does not exist in any other race. So if we have evidence from data that shows that the dark races are the progenitors of all other races, how is it that we never see their images in biblical stories? How is it that if they have been around since the beginning of time, they are not portrayed as any of the fathers or ancestors of biblical times? Who took the authority in creating these images and made the choice to exclude them? Let's find out what happens to black people. Now, I think that most of us are familiar with Nick Cannon, and if you've kept up with the news lately or in recent weeks, you're probably aware that he came under much scrutiny for a statement that he made saying black people are the true Hebrews. That statement caused him to lose contracts. He was shut up and shut down quickly and forced to apologize. Most called what he said a conspiracy theory. Some called him a racist for saying it. And some say black people are just trying to steal a shine that isn't theirs. But my question is, did anyone prove what he said wrong? So of course, no one proved him wrong. They simply forced him to apologize for what they said were anti-Semitic statements. And I ask, how are they anti-Semitic? Think about this. Our biblical figures have been portrayed as Europeans and plastered throughout the four corners of the earth, wherever you may find Christianity. And no one has challenged them or condemned them. And no one has called them anti-Semitic for these European faces, even though they may argue at times that biblical figures should or would normally look like our current Middle Easterns. But the moment someone says that those figures were most likely black, it is an almost punishable statement. Not almost, but is a punishable statement. It's similar to the way that those we have called the Jews can receive sympathy and empathy, and not to mention reparations, for what has become to be known or labeled as the Holocaust. But when black people mention our suffering during slavery and the continued suffering thereafter that even exists today, we are told to stop playing the victim and get over it. They say it happened so long ago. We can't say anything, but I digress. Now back to my statement about the Middle East. You know, we've all heard those comments before. Oh, Jesus had skin more similar to the color of olives. He was probably more Middle Eastern. Well, I ask you, what color are olives? And we know that people aren't typically the color green, so these are the only other options that you have. And if we look closely at these olives, they kind of mimic the skin tones of us black and brown people. But I digress. So while we're on the topic, let's discuss the Middle East a little further, or what we have come to call the Middle East. When considering this land, currently labeled as Middle East, one must assume that it is quite plausible that due to numerous invasions and migrations, that the people who currently occupy the land don't look very similar to the majority that once inhabited those lands. It happens, right? Think about where you are. Most of us are currently in the USA. What we call America today, with its state lines and city names, was not always America. And the people of America today do not look like the people of America before colonization. Keeping that in mind, let's focus on a place that most of us are familiar with and is very prominent in the Bible and usually associated with the Middle East: Egypt. Growing up, and even still today, American movies, TV, etc. have shown us the Egyptians looked like this. And even this portrayal of Egyptians looks absolutely nothing like those who are there now, who we have been told have been there throughout all time. The appearance of the Egyptians that we are most likely to see today is, like we mentioned in America, is due to invasion and colonization. Egypt, over time, has been conquered by many, including the Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. So the faces of the indigenous have been washed out, and the current inhabitants are referred to as Egyptian Arabs. The indigenous people of Egypt looked very much like the rest of the majority of the people on the African continent. A lot of this is evident in cave paintings and images left behind by early Egyptians. it becomes clear that if these images represent the indigenous Egyptians, the people who were there before our present day Egyptians, then the current inhabitants cannot be the Egyptians the Bible spoke of. The current majority of Egyptians who inhabit the land would actually be descendants of who the Bible called Assyrians, who invaded Egypt and again are known as Arab, who also inhabit Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. Still, you may ask, why does any of this matter? Well, it simply matters because knowing what the original Egyptians looked like helps us understand what the people of Israel look like. You know, the true Hebrews Nick Cannon mentioned. Let's focus on the story of the birth of Moses.
And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass, that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, and mortar, and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went, and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child, and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, Because I drew him out of the water.
Now, before I even get into Moses, don't those Israelites sound like the people y'all know? Okay, moving on. So the passages in Exodus tells us that Pharaoh's daughter, an ancient Egyptian woman, took Moses and basically passed him off as a son of her own. Now I ask you, how could that be possible if we are told that ancient Egyptians looked like this, but Moses looked like this. If Moses was a Hebrew who could be passed off as an Egyptian man who looked something like this, then who are these men who we have come to call the Jews? These men are of European descent, the Ashkenazi, who originated from Eastern Europe. Now, most people identify these men to be of a people who we now call the Jews, who suffered a great tragedy during what we now call the Holocaust, after which they say they came in a great substance and into their own land that was left to them by their forefathers, which, by the way, was occupied by the Palestinians, who had to be forcibly removed from those lands. But that's a story for another day. What I want to focus on, again, is that the Jews say that they returned to their land after suffering great loss through the Holocaust. Again, the Holocaust was a tragedy, but the Bible tells us exactly what God's chosen people would go through, what curses they would inherit before they were once again returned to their land. So before we look at those, we want to take a look at scripture here in Genesis 15:14. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will judge the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will depart with many possessions. So this is what the Lord said to Abram in Genesis 15:4. So again, the Holocaust was a tragedy, but this specifically says enslavement. And a lot of people say this refers to the enslavement that occurred in Egypt. Okay, let's take a look at Deuteronomy 4, because we know that they went into Egypt and Moses came to rescue them from Egypt, but God left this message to them after they were coming out of Egypt. This is Deuteronomy 4, and we'll start at 20. Remember that the Lord rescued you from the iron smelting furnace of Egypt in order to make you his very own people and his special possession, which is what you are today. But the Lord was angry with me because of you. He vowed that I would not cross the Jordan River into the good land the Lord your God is giving you as your special possession. You will cross the Jordan to occupy the land, but I will not. Instead, I will die here on the east side of the river. So be careful not to break the covenant the Lord your God has made with you. Do not make idols or any shape or form, for the Lord your God has forbidden this. The Lord your God is a devouring fire. He is a jealous God. This is Moses giving Israel a warning. In the future, when you have children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, do not corrupt yourselves by making idols of any kind. This is evil in the sight of the Lord your God and will arouse his anger. Moses already knows ahead of time that Israel is going to get comfortable in this new land, and over time they're going to go back to their old ways and pretty much make God mad at them again. So keep listening. Today I call on heaven and earth as witnesses against you. If you break my covenant, you will quickly disappear from the land you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will live there only a short time, then you will be utterly destroyed. For the Lord will scatter you among the nations where only a few of you will survive. That minority group, huh? There in a foreign land you will worship idols made of wood and stone, gods that neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. But from there you will search again for the Lord your God. And if you search for him with all your heart and soul, you will find him. In the distant future, when you are suffering all these things, you will finally return to the Lord your God and listen to what he tells you. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget the solemn covenant he made with your ancestors. So again, this is after they've left captivity in Egypt. They're being warned that again in the future, they're going to get comfortable. They're going to start back idolizing these gods that they have in the past. And God will be angered again and scatter them among the nations. Not only that, but God tells us in Deuteronomy the curses of his people that will occur once they are put out of this land that they preached.
Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look, and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations whither the Lord shall lead thee. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
So Deuteronomy gives us a pretty clear picture of the curses that will befall Israel should they break the covenant with God. And I do encourage you to read all of the curses in Deuteronomy 28. I've just pulled a few out here. And I'll focus on talking about this last one that we see here. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. So here, where it says Egypt, the Bible is reminding Israel of the captivity that it had in Egypt. Not saying that it would necessarily go back into the physical Egypt, but it would be reminiscent of the captivity that they were in. They would go into captivity again, but this time with ships. Remember, they weren't taken by ships into Egypt when they first went into captivity. But on this second captivity, it would be by ships. What other people do you know have gone into slavery or captivity by way of ships? And the very last part of that says, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now I know most of you are saying, well, yeah, the slaves, they were bought. People bought slaves. But this isn't referring to buying in that sense. if you're familiar with slavery in the Bible, you'll know that slavery was a form of servitude. It was actually a form of debt repayment. If you owed in debt to someone, you could actually go to work for them and become what they would call a slave. Not necessarily a slave in the sense that we use it today, or that we've become familiar with based on our ancestral experiences. What we've come to know became chattel slavery, which is completely different from working off a debt. Our ancestors were stole, sold, pulled off their land, and forced to work for someone who they owed absolutely nothing to. So again, that part where it says, no one shall buy you. In the servitude form of slavery, your loved ones could actually purchase you from that debt. If you're working off a debt to someone and a loved one has the money to pay off that debt, they could buy you out of that slavery. And that's simply what they mean. The slavery that Israel would go into this time, no man, no loved one would be able to buy them from it. They would serve this time. Now, so just as the Bible gives us clues of who God's chosen people were, it also gives us some information on those who say that they are Jews. Let's see what Revelation 2:9 reads. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So why would the Bible make a point in Revelation to expose, to even mention a group of people who would say they are Jews, who would be impersonating Jews, and who worship in a synagogue? Where else have we heard synagogue? Who worships in synagogues? So that's just something to take away from Revelations. It's mentioned again in Revelation 3 as well. So the Bible makes it clear that his people would no longer remember who they were. They'd be taken captive in foreign lands, and it spells out the curses that will be placed upon these people in Deuteronomy due to their many sins and their failing to keep their covenant with God. Yes, there are many on this earth who have suffered iniquities, but there are none quite as specific to those mentioned in Deuteronomy than those that have been suffered by who we call black people. But just as we mentioned the curses and the clues that God left his people, we also know that, again, as we read in Deuteronomy, God made a promise that yes, they would go into captivity again, but they'll remember themselves, they'll remember him, and they will be returned back to their land. Here's one scripture that says, I will sow them among the peoples. Again, remember, he's going to spread them out and scatter them across all nations. And they shall remember me in far countries. They shall live together with their children, and they shall return. So yes, Israel has fallen on hard times over 400 years, even longer than that, but years and generations of hard times simply because they failed to keep their covenant with God. And remember again, it says that Israel shall remember God, they shall remember themselves, and they shall return. This only again happens after their captivity. The key word is captivity. So we've gone through the scriptures that gives us some clues as to who, as Nick Cannon says, the true Hebrews are. I can almost guarantee that if you keep these things in mind and go back to reading the Bible, many more passages will become clearer. Let's take a look at a few more passages that will begin to make sense if you consider the Israelites to be who we now call black people. These scriptures may also explain why someone wanted to whitewash the figures of the Bible so badly they erected images, paintings, statues, etc. of these characters around the world and made them in their own likeness and in the likeness of their gods, even though we've always been taught that these biblical figures should look Middle Eastern, and we all know better than that. So we'll focus on our next teaching, which is on leprosy. Now, throughout the Bible, we see the word leprosy quite often. And today, when most of us think of leprosy, we tend to think of sores and lesions of the skin. The Bible shows us that in historic times, leprosy not only covered those sores and lesions, but was also commonly related to a whitening of the skin and the hairs. Think of what we call today vitiligo, or also albinoism. Seeing white skin was often cause for alarm, as it was not common, and it was even considered a curse. Since I've already mentioned Moses, I'll cover an incident that he had in Exodus 4. And the Lord said furthermore unto him, Put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, Put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put thine hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom, and behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. I'll also cover an incident that Miriam had in Numbers 12. It gives us evidence that leprosy was a form of punishment. It reads, And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle. And behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. So we can take from Scripture, as I mentioned earlier, that seeing white skin was not only alarming, but a form of punishment and considered cursed. It hits on the argument that the people of the time were more likely of darker hues, and more so the reason why a certain group of people would have such extreme jealousy that they would resort to stealing the identity of these people and uplifting themselves while turning the world against those people that were the true Hebrews that belong to God. If people with white skin, European features, were in fact the true chosen people of God, why would they be surprised? Why would there be alarm? Why would they feel it a sin? Why would they feel it a curse if their skin was turned white as snow? So I really want us to think about this. Think about how you would feel, or how this people feels, knowing that their skin is considered a curse. Knowing that there is a people who do not look like you, who the one true God considers to be his people. Do you not think that that would lead to a certain type of anger or jealousy among those people? And do you not think that given the opportunity, they would not take full advantage of being able to oppress those people? Seriously, think about it. So we've used the Bible to give us clues about those who say they are Jews and are not, and worship in the synagogue of Satan. We've also used it to gather clues of who the true Hebrews are, those who have endured the curses due to them breaking the covenant with God, those who look like the Egyptians, the indigenous Egyptians, I should say. So now we'll use the Bible to give us a few clues as to who these people are here. And I'm going to Isaiah. Those who see you stare at you, they ponder your fate. Is this the man who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble? Is the world not watching America right now? Is America not almost a mockery right now? Are they saying, I can't believe that is America, who has always been on top? People are in the streets marching, pandemic is running wild, and the world is watching. 17. The man who made the world a wilderness, who overthrew its cities. Are the founding fathers, as they call themselves, of America, not known for conquering the world? Have they not taken over many a lands? And this last sentence says, and who would not let his captives go home. I mentioned earlier chattel slavery. America and its greatest sin of slavery. Not only was it the slavery that was atrocious, but the fact that they did it for generation after generation after generation and would not allow these people to be free. Our ancestors only became free on a technicality, but we'll cover that at another time in another place. 18. All the kings of the nations lie in state, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch. You are covered with the slain, with those pierced by the sword, those who descend to the stones of the pit. Like a corpse trampled underfoot, you will not join them in burial, for you have destroyed your land and killed your people. Let the offspring of the wicked never be mentioned again. Prepare a place to slaughter his children for the sins of their ancestors. They are not to rise to inherit the land and cover the earth with their cities. Did you catch that part? For the sins of their ancestors. I will rise up against them, declares the Lord Almighty. I will wipe out Babylon's name and survivors. Have we figured out who Babylon is? Her offspring and descendants, declares the Lord. I will turn her into a place for owls and into swampland. I will sweep her with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord Almighty. So this is what is to befall these people who are now being stared at by every other nation. The same people who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble. those who conquered many cities, the same ones who wouldn't let their enslaved be free. So I ask you, could not knowing something like this lead a group of people into a jealousy or even a hatred so deep that they would make a pact with the devil so that they could inherit the land and rule over it? And they do so by keeping God's actual children oppressed and dumbed down. These are the people who made our history books and told us what our history is. They have put themselves before us, on top of us, and ahead of our God. They have created their own gods in their image, and we worship them. This is how they continue to keep our power from us. This is how they continue to keep us enslaved, not only physically, but mentally. The current hushing up and blacklisting our celebrities and activists who have spoken out against what we've been taught is the same way that they broke down our ancestors by beating the truths out of them and from stopping them from teaching their young to read and write. They didn't want us to have any knowledge because they know that knowledge empowers us. So now it's time for us to step back into our power. Remember, the scriptures told us that we would remember who we were, and we would also remember our God, the one and only true God. So we can't continue to allow them to tell us what is our truth, what is the truth. They only do so to continue to further oppress and suppress the knowledge of self, because they know that once we walk back into who we were meant to be, they shall face their judgment. We know that the world was left in the hand of the wicked one, and he has done with it what he pleases. Don't allow yourself to continue to be caught up in his deception.